Welcome, everyone. I am super excited for a new episode of the Expat Coaches Hangout. My name is Julie Marks. I'm the original China expat spouse. And my guest today is Anna Skorobogatova. I hope I'm saying this correctly. I hate it when I can't pronounce names. We are going to be covering a topic that's very close to what I've already spoken with Victoria Mertens here. And she spoke about visibility, like what it means to step into your visibility when you're abroad. And Anna, when we spoke earlier, you said you wanted to talk about being invisible as a spouse. And maybe you can introduce yourself, talk about who you are, what you do, and why invisibility of spouses is such a big topic in your world.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julie. And you got my last name right. Our listeners and people who watch us probably can tell that's a Slavic one. It's a very long one. So Russian background, married to an Australian diplomat. Have been moving around the world with our 3 kids for the last 15 plus years. Been to China, to Africa. Right now I'm based in Lebanon. And I'm also the founder of a company called Not Just a Spouse, because I've learned the hard way that what we do is so much behind the scenes and so invisible. And in a way, it creates a lot of struggles for all people involved.
Mm-hmm. Married to a diplomat, so that's a little bit different from many of my other guests who are usually in that space where you either are an expat by yourself or you follow somebody else abroad who works for a company. So how does it differ being a diplomatic spouse from being an expat spouse?
So being a diplomatic spouse is very similar, I'd say, to being an expat spouse, but there are some strings attached, right? Because normally you do have this representative role and function, although it's not you who's been sent abroad, but so it does pose some implications on us diplomatic spouses, where normally sent not necessarily to the locations where expats would go. Let's say if these are, economic expats, so people working for big corporations. So let's say right now I'm based in Lebanon. There's very little economic activity going on here. So most people I know, they're all representing diplomatic missions. So you have a certain degree of freedom and choice. It depends on foreign ministries all over the world, how they handle it. But often, yes, a bit less freedom in choosing where you have to go. And for some people, it involves moving from one place to another, and so on.
And I think also the time that you are in country is less on average, right?
Exactly. Again, it varies quite a bit, but let's say for the government, my husband is working for it's 3 to 4 years.
Oh, so that's quite long. In China, I've been in contact with people from different embassies. The US embassy, for instance, it's 2 years at the very most, it seems. So a lot of their representatives will be there for a year or 18 months. And if they hit the 2 year mark, it's almost like, oh, we feel local here. So for them, it really feels like they've barely arrived and then they leave again.
As I said, it varies all because I do know I have friends among US diplomatic staff, and it's not necessarily 2 years. Maybe it comes down also to the country where they're posted. But yes, so basically it can be 3, it can be 4 years, and anything in between, I guess.
When we spoke before about what we wanted to discuss today, the word that came up for you was invisibility. Tell me a little bit about why and what that means to you.
As I said, because I'm not the one who's been posted abroad, let's say, to represent a certain country, a certain government, I am in this amazing facilitator role per definition, right? I'm just accompanying my husband, I'm helping him to settle in, I'm there for the family. So what I do is so much behind the scenes and so hidden from the diplomatic bubble that it's very easy to feel invisible, because what I do is invisible. You don't know, no one has any idea of what it is actually to be a diplomatic spouse and go from one country to another and start your life from zero over and over and over again. Yes, so it's very easy to feel invisible because, yes, what we do is invisible.
Can you talk a little bit about what you do? I mean, what are the tasks that the diplomatic spouses fulfill that others don't see?
Well, it depends, right? If you have family, if you have children, there are a few more things you need to do. Normally, the logistical part of the move is handled by the government. So we are very privileged and very lucky. And still, you need to sit down before moving abroad, right, on a new posting, and in a way, look at your household, sort out what has to come with you, what needs to stay behind. And again, it varies a lot depending on the governments and the countries. I know some people really ship their containers and all belongings. If Australia, I can only bring personal belongings because we get allocated housing. I cannot even choose most of the time. So all these restrictions, or let's say I'm now in Lebanon, and that's why, or the same in South Africa, we were only allowed to live in certain areas, going to certain places just because of the security reasons. So you have to sort that out. Obviously, when you have kids, and I have three, that's fun of sorting out which school they're going to go to. But I guess expat partners do the same. And then once you're there, I don't know how it is for you guys, but for diplomatic husbands, it's normally 2 days that they can take off work, to settle everything in. And then they go to the office.
Yeah.
You
I
figure
think
the
it
rest.
depends largely on the company you're with, and also it depends on what country you're from, because if you're from a European country, you have a lot more personal leave. So I know that people will just, if they know they're moving, they will keep more personal days so that they will have 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to prepare the move and or settle in, right? But I think Australians are underprivileged when it comes to that. I mean, I'm talking, Belgium, France,
Yeah.
Germany, where you have up to 30 days of leave a year on top of public holidays. So that makes for a lot of freedom when it comes to those choices.
That's true, but normally not when you relocate or go on a mission as a diplomat, because that's taxpayers' money. I don't think even the Belgians can justify you being in a country for a longer period of time, just settling everyone in.
I was saying for employees, right? For employees of companies where, of course, they arrange for you to take the plane on a certain day, but these things can be agreed on. And also, no one can tell you you're not allowed to take personal leave if you have that in your contract.
Yes, fair enough. So I think there are more restrictions, basically. The box is a bit smaller if you're a diplomat.
And I think one thing that makes the box really small is restrictions on being able to work or not, correct?
That's one of the biggest ones. But there again, it's like a cake with many, many layers. Let me give you an example. When we arrived in Lebanon, the political situation in the region was so unstable. For 3 months, I was not allowed to leave Beirut. None of us. And then the situation improved for a bit, and then we were allowed, and then again not allowed. Just to give you an idea, right? You're very restricted in what you can do. I'm only allowed to take a certain taxi company here. Okay, I'm still not allowed to go to a lot of places in Lebanon. So there is very little agency, with each restriction, with each imposed rule, it's chipping away of my freedom and my agency. And the biggest one of all is exactly the inability to work. I just had a coffee morning around here once a month, an expat coffee morning, diplomatic spouses, for ed spouses. And it turns out, even if you are allowed to work on paper, which implies you would need to give up your diplomatic immunity, which might be not the best thing in a country like that, just because things can escalate and so on and so on. It's almost physically impossible. There are so many hurdles you have to overcome to actually find a job, even if you give up your diplomatic immunity. When I was in China, Australia and China did not have reciprocal agreements allowing.
Well, China is tricky that way anyway. Not just China, but China is one of those countries where each person needs their own work permit. And so you need to, first of all, qualify for a work permit. And then and it's the company that issues the work permit. It's not like in a lot of European countries, if you need a work permit because you're not European, you process your work permit and then you have a work permit. Whereas in China, it's the company that needs to apply for the work permit for that particular person, for that particular job, for this particular amount of time. And that makes it hard because you need to find a company that's willing to do that, that's able to do that, that has done has knowledge of the process. because Chinese companies mostly don't even know, because why would they, right? They just
Yes,
needed to.
sure.
And then the other problem is, are you even eligible for a work permit? Because in China, it's you need to have a university degree and at least 2 years of work experience, which again, for some European countries where the apprenticeship system is really strong, say Germany, it's very common for people in high level positions also to not have a university degree because they were an apprentice
Yes.
and then they worked in their chosen field for 20 years, 20 plus years, whatever, and then never went to university, but they are experts. So it's for them, it's almost impossible.
So here it's a bit different because I'm not allowed to work. So the thought behind us not being able to work is that if we were allowed to work, let's say if there was now a reciprocal agreement between Lebanon and Australia, I would take away jobs from the local people, and they want to prevent that. That's the main reason.
Yeah. And I think there are many countries that have that thought process. Yes, absolutely. And
So
what
most of the
about,
time we are
so you
not allowed.
mentioned you
Sorry, yes.
mentioned being a representative, right? Even though technically speaking, you're not the representative, your spouse is. But does that extend also to, for instance, not being able to volunteer or not volunteer where you want to volunteer or things like that?
Not necessarily, probably. I don't know if it's a bad joke, but if I went out to volunteer for Hezbollah, that would not be a good idea. You're different.
Well, okay,
So,
yeah. I didn't think
right?
I didn't think they took volunteers, but okay, yes.
Right? So have to be smart about it. And you just need to basically think these things through, right? You know, what is potential implication? What does this company do or this organization I'm volunteering for? But no, in most cases, you can volunteer. But when I say you're representing the country, you have to drive okay. You have to be able, like, you know, if you create some problems and troubles,
It
you are
falls
there,
back on the
not in a
country.
private, yes, manner in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in for the volunteering, you have that in some other, like you have that in China as well. It's the idea of NGOs is not as established. And also there are some NGOs where you want to be a little bit careful, like anything that is church sponsored, you wouldn't want to volunteer for them, or you wouldn't be able to volunteer for them, or anything that is, I don't know, Journalists Without Borders or something like that, where
Exactly.
that may not be the best. So where it can become politically sensitive if you do something. But I would imagine that being a diplomatic spouse, that just balloons, right? The things that become politically sensitive can be numerous.
Exactly, exactly. And that's why, as I said, it's just a very, like, there are a lot of layers and restrictions and unspoken rules in a way.
Mhm. And you talk a lot about this, what's hidden, what's under the surface, right? You tend to use the iceberg model for that. Can you walk us through your model for that?
Exactly. So, especially when I tell people I'm a diplomatic spouse, most people sigh and say, "Oh my God, lucky you, what a privileged, amazing lifestyle," right? Because people have this picture, I don't know, maybe they watch Netflix shows, you know, The Diplomat.
Mm-mm.
And
Never
it's
seen it,
really
but
same.
yes. No,
Yeah,
I think, yeah,
have you heard of
I
it?
am thinking it's expat spouse X100, basically, because
Exactly. So it's just me with a diplomatic passport in one hand and a cocktail in the other, cruising from one event, living in a lavish residence, having a driver and a cook and a cleaner. And maybe it does apply a bit more to ambassadors' wives or husbands, but it's a very tough role. And I'm not going to talk about this now. What I mean is invisible. So most people would have an idea of what a diplomatic life looks like and that of a diplomatic spouse. Yes, I go to interesting places. Yes, am looked after. Definitely. Like, you know, I know I'm very safe here in Lebanon. If things go wrong, I'll be flown out the day after. Like, you know, I'm really safe here. My kids can go to the best school and so on and so on. So there are a lot of perks. But what people don't see unless they walk in these shoes is what is beneath these surface, right? The 95% of the iceberg. That when I come to any new country, and you know that, Julie, before your life, normal life, routine life starts, you need to set it up. There is no one figuring it out for you here. So my day-to-day life is very mundane. It's like everyone's life. But I first have to create it. I have to, and you know, when you have children, it's not only finding the school. So it's not only the logistics of working out, where is your
I
supermarket,
think,
where is your
yeah,
doctor, where is your dentist, all of that, right? It takes time and takes energy, but also emotionally. Let's say if you move around with three kids or getting older, it's very taxing on the parents. It's actually something I'm writing about today for LinkedIn, because this is not seen. Like the amount of time I had to be this safe container for my kids who were literally falling apart and grieving the moves and resisting being yet again the new kids and a new school over and over again. So no one
and I
sees
think
that.
also the kids probably have maybe a diluted version, but they still have a version of what you get as well. Because when it's, oh, you're diplomat brats, right? You're diplomat kids, then there's this assumption that they have a certain life, that they have a certain, maybe in Beirut it's not as much of a problem because everyone is more or less in the same shoes. But if you have other expat kids and local kids and diplomat kids all in one school system, I think it would get very complicated or would get complicated.
Yes, it is a bit like that here, but definitely, and yet it's another big topic. What I wanted to add on to, you know, my answer to your first question about this, the iceberg, layers. So it's only me. It's also me. What's happening to me? Okay, I've helped now settle everyone in. The kids have their friends, they have their activities. The husband is happy and can focus on his job. Once all these boxes have been ticked off, where am I in this picture? If I'm not allowed to work, if it's difficult to find friends because it varies, it can be very unlucky.
Mhm.
Plus, also something I haven't, I think, mentioned before, there is this, because it's in a way a representative role, people tend to keep their struggles to themselves out of
Yeah, you
fear
wear
that
the
if I
mask. I think
share,
you wear the mask all the time. And I would, again, think that
yes,
that would be more extreme for diplomat spouses,
yes,
just because there's more expectation of being the most polished version of a spouse that you can be.
exactly. And I also then feel a bit concerned. What if I shared with another diplomatic spouse? And let's say if her partner works for the same embassy, what if things, well, we don't want to open any Pandora boxes, and that's why people tend to keep their struggles and their pain to themselves. And exactly, just show up to a coffee morning, smile, and talk about kids and school and travel. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's similar for expats because then you have company politics that come in. If it's within, like where Shenyang, for instance, where spent 10 years and they're the largest employer, not just in the city, in the entire northeast of China, was the company my husband worked for. And so chances were if you were in a group of expats, there would be at least one, and possibly the majority of the people present would be either from that company or affiliated with that company. And so then it's always, I've never played that game, but I knew people who were like, "Ooh, do you know so and so is so and so's spouse?" And I'm like, yeah, yeah, nice person. No, 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 but you know where they are in the hierarchy, and I don't know. You tell me. So I think there's a lot of office politics that gets played out in the families, and I heard that especially the families with school-aged kids, like how office politics, or in your case, embassy politics, would be played out in the schoolyard, where it's like, my dad is your dad's boss, so you can't say anything to me, stuff like that, or parents fighting over school-related matters that were really a reflection of what was happening in their work life. I find that really surreal, but apparently it's a thing.
Exactly. So I did not experience that. What you were just saying that the kids were fighting, and maybe they did. What I know is that because we normally are not allowed to choose where we live. Let's say in China, in Shanghai, we lived in a compound, and yes, we lived on the same floor as my husband's boss. Also had three kids, and they spent a lot of time together. So we had to be very careful about, obviously, it's not what we're discussing at home and how. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's one of the issues because when you are looking at expat life, I feel that the circles are misused. In a lot of cases, you don't get to choose who you're spending your time with, or only to some extent. And again, I think diplomatic circles, it's worse because you do have restrictions. You do have to be careful with sensitive information, with national
Exactly.
politics.
Yes. So you have to be a bit more careful once again because, yes, you are representing the country. Well, implicitly, maybe not explicitly, not as a diplomat, but yes, as a spouse of a diplomat.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And I think one of the layers that people don't see, I don't know, I'm sure it happens to expat partners too, if you move around the world and relocate, especially if you're really constantly and continuously moving from one country to another, settling everyone in and do it over and over, and you cannot work, right? Even if you want to, just imagine what it does to you, like to your marriage, to the relationships in the family, to the whole family dynamic. It's very taxing. It's really difficult. It can be very isolating, and it can end up in a very nasty way. Actually, I just met someone the other day for lunch. Her first posting was in Port Moresby. I was very tough, and there was a suicide there. So there are these cases of women, mostly committing suicide, diplomatic spouses at posts, having on paper, I don't know, good life. But it just tells you something,
I
right?
think it's part of it is your dependence because you without your spouse, you're no one, you're nothing, you're non-existent. I think that's a problem. And that expat spouses get that, but again, not to the same degree, I feel. I think another problem is that there's some kind of a fatigue almost that can set in if you have to do this over and over and over again. And rather than making that easier, because you can already anticipate the problems that will arise, because the same types of problems will arise for the kids settling in at school, for you to find, as you said, trivial things like a dentist and a hairdresser and a GP and a pediatrician that will work for your family, right? And where to get groceries, where to do this, where to do that, how to navigate, and also underlying cultural differences that where it's not the same. Living in China or living in South Africa, not exactly the same challenges you're facing. So I would think that the fatigue also sets in.
Absolutely. The fatigue of exactly reinventing your life from zero every time, over and over again. But I think underneath of that is like really this slow and gradual burnout because you're not doing it for you. You're really just being the most amazing supporting actress, the emergency contact, always there if they need you, but you're not there for yourself anymore. And I think this erosion of you, that's actually what gets to most people, and that creates, I think, more suffering and more pain than any logistical. I mean, look, I can settle my family on the moon in 1 month. I've done it so many times. And culture, yeah, sure, but we're all humans, so that's also how I see everything. So I'm really good at that. And I think we obviously the more I do something, the better I become at it. But I think what do I want? Like, is anyone interested? Hey, I'm here too. If I'm
Well,
only
this is,
supporting
yeah.
and putting my dreams and my fulfillment on hold indefinitely, 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 like think about it. What would it do to you?
Mhm. That's all, that's very doom and gloom, right? It sounds, is there a silver lining that you see with, I mean, you run a company, you help other diplomatic spouses. What is the silver lining you can give them?
The silver lining is really like at the end of the day, what we do, although it is invisible and we feel like we are really just managing, I don't know, behind the scene, all these things, actually what we do is really, really mission critical. Like, because, in the diplomatic world, we are officially called the dependents. Really, like I'm a suitcase
Yeah.
being dragged around the world, but I'm not. And I know my husband is actually dependent on me. Like, if you travel on an airplane and the airplane hits turbulence, like everyone looks at people who are in charge. And if they start freaking out and panicking, then you know what's going to happen on the plane. So I'm the same, being this glue, I'm the anchor, I'm the stability. I'm creating home in a house and a new country. Someone does all that, like, really holding everything together and everyone being. And that means if my husband knows who he can actually go to work on day 3 and actually focus on his job because he has me and I take care of everything emotionally, logistically. Like this, we come as a package. It's not one person. Because if I'm falling apart, he will not be able to do his job. That's it.
All right. So what I'm hearing is you are recognizing, because there is not always that recognition from outside, it's helping diplomatic spouses recognize and gain that recognition internally and reinforce and remind them that they are what is holding the mission together.
Exactly. That's one thing, but also that's why I'm creating safe community spaces. You understand me to a certain degree because it's shared living experience, right? But like because I said, it's the box is a bit smaller even, and maybe even more privileged from if you look at it from the outside. It means we've also internalized this pressure, like what's wrong with me if I'm not happy? I cannot even share. I have no reasons. I cannot justify what I'm feeling, and I think that's really bad.
Yeah. The
People
most
need to
recent,
have,
yes, the most recent
yeah,
episode I did on the Expat Coaches Hangout was about expat guilt. So it was exactly, I mean, part of it was exactly that. It was the how dare I be unhappy? How dare I say that things are not working when I have all of this?
exactly. And if you try to share with someone who is not living this expat or diplomatic lifestyle, to them it's like, really, what's your problem? You don't even need to work, Anna. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's my favorite. You don't even need to work. I'm like, just just be quiet. I'm not, just be quiet.
Exactly. What if
I
I
know.
want to and I'm not allowed?
Yeah.
Like, how does that feel? So, exactly this inability to share it with someone who has not walked on this path and also kind of taking off this facade from the diplomatic spouses circles. You don't have to smile through pain and appear polished unlike you have your, well, everything together, right? This permission, okay, can be real because I know exactly what you're feeling,
Mm.
exactly what you're going through. Safe space, exactly. Being seen, heard. You can, right, feel all that.
Mhm.
And it's very valid
And
because I said this is
process,
so
yeah, process
invisible
it together.
and
That's
process it
beautiful.
together, but also this empowerment from, hang on, I'm actually the leader here. Like everyone, like really, I'm so mission critical
Mhm.
and giving this to back to yourself. Like I'm not a decoration.
Well, you can be decorative, but still the main part of the structure, right?
That's right, but this is actually that's a quote. Someone, when you go to events, people would meet you for the first time and ask, like, what do you do here? I said, okay, I'm here with my spouse, or I'm the mom of, and I know someone who at some point started saying, I'm a decoration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's in expat circles, what I've had or what some clients have told me is that even if both spouses work, there's a distinction made between who's the real expat here. Because everyone knows that for a lot of companies, the person who was sent gets the expat package and the expat
Yes.
salary. And then there's another person who can become a local, can be on a local contract.
Yes.
So I've had the case where two people doing the exact same work and one person earning 5 times as much as the other.
Yes.
And then you think about what that does to a person, right? How that impacts their self-esteem. And especially this is somebody super driven, always self-identified through their work. And to then be told, oh, so who of you is the real expat? Meaning who of you actually earns the big bucks?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's hard and heartbreaking. I guess if you cannot even say that, right?
And
You're really
how much
here.
worse if you don't, you're not even anything. You are
You're not even
you don't
anything,
have you don't have your own term, right? You don't
No.
even have the term local expat. You don't even have your term. You're just a suitcase. Yes.
Yes, exactly. And that actually creates also such a big imbalance, I think, and that applies to most relationships and marriages, because if I'm continuously dependent financially on my spouse, just because simply, although I have 2 university degrees, but I cannot use them, right? So it's really this erosion of self-confidence, like every move, it just chips away a bit. And it was my personal journey, kind of how to reframe it, but also think, okay, what can I do? If we can sit here and talk about and say, well, complain and then say it's all gloom and doom, it doesn't help. We all know that, right? So what can I actually do? And I think from this first empowerment, yes, what I do is so worthy, so big, so huge. I am worthy. I am deserving of a recognition. If the governments are not giving it to us right now, well, let's give it to ourselves, but also see, okay, that's what I did. I've opened a business because I could not tolerate it anymore. That was too much for me to handle.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Before we leave, where can people find you? What are the best ways to contact you?
Okay, so they can find me on LinkedIn under Anna Skorobogatova. And there actually share all the stories and creating these safe spaces about the topics that are not often spoken about, but are very relevant and super important. That's also a place where I do some advocacy work, trying to raise awareness and actually do change things. I have a website, not just spouse.com.
Yeah, we'll link to
Yes, you
both
can
of
link
those
that,
in
and
the show notes.
Instagram. That's where people can find me.
So it sounds like the best places to find you would be Instagram, LinkedIn, and your website. I'll link to all of this in the show notes. And I hope that the rest of your posting goes well. And I hope that the next posting, wherever it may be, will be an exciting place and you will get to support the diplomatic spouses in your new location as well.
Thank you very much, Julie. It was such a pleasure. Thank you for wonderful questions and giving me this opportunity to share a bit more what's happening behind the scenes in the diplomatic spouse world.
My pleasure. Thank you.